Now it's time to say a very good morning to Mr. Neil Oliver. Neil, how you doing?
Morning, Mike. Oh, praying for a peaceful death as usual.
Do you know, funnily enough, I was rereading your column from the Sunday Times just yesterday afternoon, and after Captain Tom had died, and remarkably, you were writing about people travelling on ships through the sort of Second World War and going through that kind of peril, which is exactly what he did. He went on a ship through to South Africa and then on to India when he was only 20 years of age. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about that generation of men who went to war without question, which I don't think we would possibly do now.
It's, I think, very difficult, if not impossible, to imagine that those circumstances. Receiving a letter telling you that no matter who you are and what it is that you thought you were going to be doing for the next 6 years, no, in fact, you're going to be in uniform and you're going to risk your life, possibly lose your life in the service, the unquestioning service of the country, and that's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
Who's alive today that went through something like that? Not many. And you said it all about Captain Tom. What a life. To live to be 100, to be so, it's almost perfect in a way, to live to be 100 years old, to come through all of it, to come through the war and the hardship, and then, to do that, to make that fundraising effort, to continue to be an example in your in the last months of your life, and then to be knighted by the Queen, and to be one of the few people who can actually consider the Queen to be a youngster.
Yes, yeah, and also and also he did it all with such kind of casualness, really. I mean, he clearly didn't think of himself as a celebrity. Whenever he was interviewed, and I think we interviewed him once on this show, he was just very humble. He was very ordinary. He didn't feel as if he was doing anything special, and I think that's very much a trait of his generation. My mother is the same. You and I have spoken before about our relatives who came through the Blitz, and she was in Clyde Bank when it was bombed, and she used to tell us stories of us, a 17-year-old going down into the air raid shelter every night. I mean, just extraordinary stuff.
I know. I listened. I saw some of the interviews. Obviously, he was interviewed many times, and I honestly used to wince sometimes at the way in which he was addressed. There tended to be from people who were half his age or a quarter of his age. There was almost that the tone of voice sometimes I found verged towards patronising with someone like him.
Yeah.
Where in truth he should only have been handled with reverence,
right,
and the most extreme respect. The way you sometimes hear people of so much younger than the interviewee, almost patting him on the head,
right,
which I found difficult to listen to at times, because he was an extraordinary figure, and yes, made no fuss about it. It didn't appear as if he wanted any kind of thanks for it. He was just doing it because it was the appropriate thing to do, and he was of that generation that where something needed doing, they just accepted that they would do it if there was no one else, and that's they are part of the fabric of a material that has worn, I think, very thin in our society. There are so few of them left. It's amazing to think, really. I mean, I'm of the generation that the First World War veterans, many of them were still alive in my lifetime.
Yes.
And all of them, it seemed understandable. That they were in their 90s and then centenarians. And it's salutary to be reminded that the Second World War generation are nearly gone as well. That seems extraordinary that these people are one of the ultimate endangered species. They will soon all be gone, and when they go, they take with them something that is irreplaceable.
Yes.
And it would be impossible, I think, to replicate their lives, because I'm sure, I don't know, because I'm a stripling by comparison. I can only guess, but I think because their lives were harder, they had less in the way of luxury. Food was different, lifestyles were different, automation was different, technology was so much less of an influence, and hard graft was much more a part of people's lives, and that clearly moulded and sculpted people into a shape that's no longer possible, because by comparison we live lives of the most ridiculous luxury, and most of us don't face danger. We're not put in harm's way in the way that someone like Captain Tom was.
No.
And so when they go, we ought to pay attention, because when they go, that sort of person will be gone forever.
Yes. And I mean, as I was saying yesterday when I was talking to Mark Dolan about him, in a way, there's a celebration to be had in addition. Obviously, it's sorrowful when somebody dies, but when you get to the age of 100, you kind of want to celebrate their lives in the same way that my mother, who will be 97 in March, and I'm hoping I'll get to see her before she gets to be 98, but I don't know if I'll get to her. But she's sort of asking my sister, is anyone coming for my birthday? Which is kind of heartbreaking in a way, because, that's all I want to do is go and see her. And she is a remarkable woman, always has been. But I also think about the opposite end of the spectrum. My 16-year-old son is the same age at which my grandfather went to the First World War, lied about his age to go, and ended up running the horses who were pulling the guns, and you just think, I can't imagine that. I just cannot imagine my 16-year-old going to war. I
know both of my grandfathers survived the war. My mum's dad was shot by friendly fire, actually, at Gallipoli. Right. He was accidentally very severely wounded by one of his own side, but survived. Lived to tell the tale. My dad's dad was in France. He was at the Somme and then at Passchendaele, and was wounded. We're not even sure, at least twice, possibly more. Right. And came out of it and did the traditional thing about saying barely a word about it. Yes. Kept not a diary, kept no notes, never spoke about it, and was essentially an enigma, or his experiences were an enigma until the end of his life. My mum's dad died before I was born, and I wrote, as you say, at the weekend about it's a story that haunts me. I heard it only by chance. I was filming on a boat off the Isle of Wight, and the skipper told me about the loss of the SS Mendi, which was a troop ship that was bringing African men from the part of what was called the South African Native Labour Corps, and they were coming not to be given weapons to fight, but they were going to do just labouring, digging trenches and all the rest of it. And in the English Channel, there was a collision with another vessel, and the Mendi sank very, very quickly. With the loss, 650 men and crew were lost, and it was Xhosa, Basotho, Zulu, some of the great tribes of Africa, and there's this unbelievable account of their chaplain gathering the surviving men on the deck as it sank in a fog-bound English Channel at night, freezing in February 1917, and he said to them, you're coming to do what you came to do. You're going to do what you came to do. We are dancing the death drill, and we are sons of Africa. And I, Xhosa, call you, the Zulus and Basothos and the rest, my brothers, and we will die like brothers. And they took our assegais from us, and we left them in the kraals. But our voices are here with our bodies, and so we will sing. And so they did. He brought them to order, and they went into the water. And as I say, 650 of those men were lost. It's still one of, if not the worst, loss of life in British coastal waters, and I think about that, the fact that they were brought to order in that way, and that in their last moments he invited them to think of sacrifice and brotherhood, and the inevitability of death, and that and they left behind this story that is told in South Africa to this day. And when I think about them, when February comes around, it was February 1917 when it happened. And it chills my blood and puts the hackles up on my neck. And those kinds of stories about people having a different perspective on life and death, I find makes me see the world and even the shape of reality in a different way. Yes, I think that's absolutely right, because what we have now is a very different reality, I think, and very different leadership, very different attitudes. And I guess inevitably they've changed over the years and over the decades of our kind of being more well off, and as you say, being better protected from danger and all of that sort of thing. But you do worry that has also an effect on the kind of principles by which we live. I was talking to my daughter yesterday in Dubai, and she was saying she get heartily sick of all of these people who are raving and ranting on about these influencers who have gone to Dubai to kind of do whatever it is that they do, sit in front of a swimming pool posing. Good luck to them as far as I'm concerned. But there's a part of society that's blaming them, for killing people, blaming them for, being reckless with their health. And, we've become this kind of nanny state almost. And it hasn't happened overnight, I suppose, but that's what we are. Yeah, there's definitely been an increase in the way in which we are as a society much more critical of each other in every conceivable way. There's constant finger wagging and finger pointing and criticism goes on about the way other people live their lives, and that's why you talk about Sir Tom and we're talking about lives that were shaped by hardship, and there's just, for good or ill, there's no doubting that it shaped a different kind of person. Because they had less, they somehow became more. And because they were properly in awe of death, they were properly in awe of life. And it's not by accident and not by coincidence. A long life lived like his is an example, because his life can't be lived again. And the most we can do really is look back and pay attention and take the example. And to forget that is fatally dangerous. There's a good Russian saying, I think it's Russian, which is, if you look back at the past, you'll lose an eye. But if you don't look back at the past, you'll lose both eyes. Right. And we at peril, it's so important, first of all, absolutely to celebrate Sir Tom, because 100 years, what a life lived, a life well lived, and making a contribution until the end. But it's also important to take note of why he became the character that he was. Now, some of it's down to the man he was, but a huge amount of it is he was shaped and sculpted by the experiences of those 100 years, and to be reminded, I think, at all times about what a harder life, maybe a simpler life, a life where you had to do more for yourself, and where you asked, not what your country could do for you, but what you could do for your country. These are cliched things, but we see the effect. His like, we will not see his like again.
No, quite right. Now, I don't want to put you into any difficult situations here, and I know you don't need any help to be disliked by the nationalists in Scotland, but what is going on with the SNP, by the way? Because we've got the happy situation of looking forward to Ian Blackford, Prime Minister's questions today. We've got Nicola Sturgeon being very chippy about the vaccination programme not going very well up there. And we've also got this Alex Salmond inquiry going on, which her husband has refused to go and present himself in front of. I mean, is there a chance, Neil, do you think, that there's a bit of a wobble going on with the SNP?
Here's a $64,000 question. All the evidence so far has suggested that the party is, and it's at its upper echelons, are somehow Teflon coated, and nothing really has seemed to stick so far. Clearly, the rollout of the vaccine has slowed and is stalling up here, and I don't know why. But when you look back at the track record of the Scottish Government in recent years, everything from big civil engineering projects, bridge building, shipbuilding, or looking after education or health, it has all run onto the buffers to some extent, because there's a lack of competence, straightforward competence. It is a single issue party that exists for one thing and for one thing only, which is to preach separatism, and its eye is never on the other ball, never on the ball at all, in terms of running the country. So the fact that something as massive and as logistically challenging as the rollout of the vaccine for 5 million people, that it's not going very well, I don't find very surprising. I've stopped listening to reports from the inquiry, the Salmond inquiry, so-called, because it just seems to be a catalogue of obfuscation and avoidance and denial, and people changing their evidence or refusing to give evidence, or stories of documents that the inquiry wants to see not being surrendered. And it's just become one of those many stories now, set in Scottish context. Someone like myself and many people around me, we just shrug our shoulders because we've seen all of it before. It's just the continuation of a turgid song.
Well, it really is. And I mean, unbelievably as well, Nicola Sturgeon is so wedded to the whole idea of this kind of European Union rejoining, staying in, reapplying as a small independent nation, that even she alone, even including the leaders of other European countries, couldn't bring herself to be critical of the nonsense that they got up to last Friday night when they tried to impose a border in Ireland, which they told us we couldn't do.
One wonders, does one not? how that was allowed to happen.
Right.
Setting aside the rights or wrongs of it, having spent all those years saying that the number one holy grail of Brexit was the avoidance of a hard border in Ireland, and that if Brexit were to cause that to happen, then that would be unforgivable and unthinkable and would have consequences, unbearable. And then how on earth did they get themselves through a decision-making process where they tried to apply the border by themselves?
Yeah.
How inept are people when it comes to thinking, what will this look like if we do it? You think the average family sat around their dinner table, offered that set of circumstances, would have said, whoa, no, you don't want to do that.
No.
That's the decision you don't want to take,
right.
So let's move on and consider something else. And you think, how are these extremely well-paid people, unelected, but obviously held in high regard by someone, how do they go through the decision-making process and do the very thing that they said, if it were to happen, would be an unforgivable disaster?
Well, I mean, we used to do a thing when I was working in Fleet Street as a journalist, and we used to have this thing called the private eye test. And we'd say to each other, well, how would this look if it got into private eye? Whether it was with regard to how you were getting a story, or what you were thinking of doing, or who you were thinking of convincing that you weren't a journalist and trick, all of that. And always, if the answer came back, that's not going to look very good in private eye, you didn't do it.
I mean, to bring it back to Sir Tom and his calibre of human being. I mean, I asked the question because I don't know, but I asked the question, is the decision-making that we're seeing, say, in the European Commission or being made by heads of state and leaders of government, is it because we're now led by a generation, our own and above, that hasn't been shaped and tested in the way that the likes of Sir Tom's generation was? And is there just have the lives that they've led and the jobs that they've been able to do and the untested positions that they've been in haven't given them the qualities? Now, I mean, I'm not suggesting that we want to go back to having wars in which we can, in inverted commas, forge the heroes and leaders of the future. I don't mean that, but I just asked the question: is the quality, the standard of leadership that we're seeing now here at home and around the world a consequence of people, really not knowing the day they were born and not having been tested and shaped? And is this therefore what you get?
Yes, that's a very good point. And I think in the end, we often say, don't we, that you get the government you deserve. And I think for a long time, politicians have become sort of immune to criticism by the public because they've kind of encouraged people to be disinterested. It's only relatively recently, because of Brexit, I would say, that people have got back into politics, because I think the whole Blair era and the Cameron era was all about basically them doing stuff that we didn't really care about.
Yes, and I think they are the concept of the professional career politician, I think, is just, or the consequences of that political class. I think we're seeing it play out now, and again, I don't know, because it's impossible to be objective about these things, but because I was younger when I was looking up at, and I did sometimes look up to political figures when I was a child or when I was in my teens or my early 20s. And I did feel that there were impressive, charismatic, wise, experienced figures whom it was worth listening to. Often, even though I didn't like what they were saying and I didn't necessarily agree with them, they still exuded a kind of gravitas and a kind of stateswoman-like quality that was instantly recognisable as an observer. But as I say, was that just because I was much more naive then and I wasn't making the kind of value judgments of people that I make now? Again, I say I do not know. But I just know that I look across the political spectrum at home, broadly speaking, and across Europe and the wider world, and I just feel my shoulders sag in despair at the quality or the lack thereof. I don't see the charismatic figures that you think, now that's leadership. I just don't see it ever.
No, you're absolutely right. Listen, Neil, great to talk to you as ever again. We're out of time, but fascinating stuff. Neil Oliver, TV presenter, archaeologist, telling us there about the paucity of talent, I think you'd find, because I don't think anyone in their right mind would look at somebody like Matt Hancock and think, now there is a brilliant individual. Would they? I don't think I'm being unkind to him. This is Talk Radio.